Guys, come closer. I have a secret to tell you. This is mind-blowing, alright? Prepare yourselves. Baby butterflies don't look like small butterflies. They're actually a completely different animal called a caterpillar, and they look more like worms than actual butterflies. If I told you this 400 years ago, you would probably be shocked. Or maybe you wouldn't, because I would have just told you something so ridiculous that only a fool would truly believe it. Right? Well, because I'm telling you this today, your response is probably something more along the lines of, dude, obviously. Everyone knows baby butterflies are caterpillars. That's not a secret. You're bad at secrets. Okay, but here's the thing. I'm sure almost everyone nowadays gets taught about this type of life cycle in school. We call it complete metamorphosis, and it refers to how certain insects change drastically as they grow and move through 3 life stages called the larva, pupa, and adult or imago. The idea of teaching about butterfly metamorphosis in early science levels has to do with getting people excited about biology by showing off the diversity of animal growth. After all, if a butterfly grows in a way that's this different from the way you and I grow, imagine how many other secrets there are to discover in nature. It's an inspiring thought, and a sound idea, but I think we can do even better. See, I don't actually think that we're being taught about metamorphosis in the optimal way. Allow me to experiment with you. Imagine that a child comes up to you one day and asks you a simple question. Why do butterflies make chrysalises? What kind of answer would you give? Would you be satisfied with the answer you would have provided? What if the question was posed by a curious adult instead of a child? Would your answer change? Would it become more detailed? Before I gave this question hours of thought, I was in a place where I don't believe I would have come up with a truly satisfactory answer to this basic question. Here's the thing. If complete metamorphosis was taught correctly in our science curricula, then the rest of this video should contain nothing more than common knowledge. It should be just as trivial as the secret I told you at the beginning of the video. Nothing you don't already know. But if the storybooks and TV shows and classroom lessons about butterfly metamorphosis it didn't prepare us to answer the question of why all those stages are needed, then how much can we say we really know? I believe we've been conditioned to ignore the most fascinating aspect of complete metamorphosis. We were taught that a butterfly's life cycle includes a pupa because nature is fascinating and diverse. What we should have been taught is that butterfly life cycles include a pupa because the pupa is the most powerful adaptation the animal kingdom has ever produced. Let's go back in time for a moment. No, not millions of years this time, just to the year 1668. 3 jars sit on a table. One of them remains open, one is covered by a piece of gauze that lets air through, and the last is covered by an impassable cork. A piece of meat can be found in all 3. They are part of an experiment by Italian physician Francesco Redi. This experiment would be the first step taken to disprove the idea of spontaneous generation. See, a long time ago, people had no idea where all these little insects like flies came from. The belief at the time was that they were practically born from nothing. They simply appeared in the water, in the ground, in spoiled food, etc. Well, Redi believed that life needed to come from life. So he conducted this experiment that proved that no maggots could appear on the meat if flies were unable to get into the jar. The jar that was left open produced maggots on the meat, whereas the jar covered with gauze only resulted in maggots on top of the gauze, unable to get to the meat. The jar that was completely sealed off had no maggots at all. With our modern-day knowledge, we can understand what was happening here. Maggots were hatching from eggs laid by flies. The flies were freely able to land on the meat in the first jar, resulting in several maggots being born on the meat. The flies could smell but not physically access the meat in the second jar, causing them to lay eggs on top of the gauze. Finally, the meat in the third jar was completely closed off from the outside, so flies did not interact with it. Back in the 1600s, this was a startling revelation. Not only did most people believe in spontaneous generation, but most of them had no idea that flies were maggots. This is because of 2 reasons. First, flies and maggots were thought of as lowly and disgusting creatures not worth studying, and second, These animals were using one of nature's most impressive magic tricks, holometabolism. Let me take a moment to fully clear up what this means. For our purposes today, holometabolism and complete metamorphosis mean the same thing. They are the life cycle of an insect that includes a larva, pupa, and adult. In contrast, hemimetabolism, or incomplete metamorphosis, does not include a pupa. Instead, life stages of hemimetabolous animals are called nymphs or juveniles until they reach adulthood. In a sense, the leading question for today's subject is, why aren't all insects hemimetabolous? A pupa is a mostly immobile and defenseless form. Why would any animal even want one? I find it helps to look at which animals use an adaptation in order to determine that adaptation's purpose. We've already talked about two of them. Butterflies and flies are holometabolous. Some others in the group include dobsonflies, lacewings, caddisflies, beetles, scorpionflies, and wasps and fleas. I want to focus on 4 orders in particular. If we measure animal orders by how many species they contain, we encounter several arthropod groups with tens of thousands of species to their name. But there are only 4 orders in the animal kingdom currently competing for the number 1 spot. The bees, ants, and wasps of Hymenoptera, the flies and mosquitoes of Diptera, the beetles and weevils of Coleoptera, and the moths and butterflies of Lepidoptera. Wouldn't you know it? Those are all holometabolous insects. Now, it's a fair point to say that having the most species doesn't necessarily mean you're the greatest animal ever, but at the same time, you can't achieve a higher species diversity than all other animals without doing something very right. What exactly is complete metamorphosis adding to these animals that is providing so much success? At first, I couldn't find an intuitive answer. My original thought was that the body structure of these animals at adulthood was so complicated that they couldn't be born with them, so the pupa served as a way to reconstruct the animal's body. This could be a way to explain why holometabolous insects are some of the most successful animals. Maybe flies and beetles and bees just have the perfect animal bodies, and the only way to obtain such complex bodies is to be born as a simpler creature and then pupate into them. Well, this theory is a solid start, but it falls apart if other animals have bodies that rival the complexity of holometabolous insects. Is a beetle body really that much more complicated than that of a roach or a shield bug? Is an ant that much more complex than a termite? Does a true fly blow a mayfly out of the water? Some of these comparisons just don't sit right with me. My original theory hits a lot of speed bumps, so to speak, but the biggest of the speed bumps has a name. It's called Odonata. If you start asking random people what they think the best insects are, you will inevitably get dragonflies as an answer. And for good reason. With a measured prey capture rate around 95% accuracy, they are arguably the world's most successful predator. Their body model is nearly identical to insect orders that existed in the Paleozoic era several hundreds of millions of years ago, long before bees and butterflies were around. Their 4 wings are controlled by independent flight muscles, which is a unique trait among insects and gives them unparalleled directional control during flight. It's safe to say that dragonflies and damselflies from the order Odonata have some of the most capable and successful body models, and yet they are hemimetabolous. They go through incomplete metamorphosis, meaning they lack a pupal stage. So it would seem pupae don't necessarily yield more complex adult forms. I wanted to illustrate my original hypothesis as well as the problems it ran into because I think it shows off how tricky and fun it can be to solve the puzzles of animal evolution. But enough with the failed hypotheses. What is the answer, darn it? According to modern consensus, the success of holometabolism can be attributed to 3 advantages it grants. The first of these advantages is illustrated perfectly by the dragonflies we just spoke about. This is a dragonfly nymph. Never seen one? I wouldn't be surprised. I never see these guys either, but that's because they live in a different world than you and I. Dragonflies and damselflies spend all of their pre-adult lives underwater, feeding on small aquatic animals until they're ready to molt for the final time and gain their wings. The advantage this grants is subtle, but incredibly powerful. It means that dragonflies don't have to share the same food source as their offspring. In a world where food scarcity can strike in any ecosystem, it's tremendously helpful for an animal not to be forced to choose between individual success and success of its species. In other words, if you don't have enough to eat, you die. But if your offspring don't have enough to eat, they die, and your species' chances of survival drop. Insects like dragonflies don't have that issue, because dragonflies and dragonfly nymphs don't eat the same food. One catches prey from the air, and the other catches prey in the water. So what did it take to obtain this adaptation? Well, a lot of things can change when an arthropod molts to a different instar or life stage, but some things are harder to change than others. Changing one's body to process different food than before is tricky, for example. Odonites and their nymphs are both carnivorous, so in order to not share the same food source, they need to live in different biomes. In a way, the water surface acts like a portal between two worlds, where nymphs and adults live respectively. This use of water as a way to separate life stages is so successful that almost every hemimetabolous insect that differs in diet from nymph to adult is semi-aquatic. This includes animals like stoneflies and mayflies. Well, that's great and all, but it does mean these animals are stuck in aquatic ecosystems, since they can't lay eggs without water. Holometabolous insects don't have this problem, though. The pupal stage puts a stop to an animal's physical activity for a long period of time, but in exchange, the animal can use all of its stored energy to strategically disassemble and reabsorb all of the cells that its new body no longer needs. This will often lead to the most drastic body changes any animal can experience. As a result, even the type of food the animal can consume can be changed. Check this out. This is a type of wasp from the Pepsis genus, colloquially called a tarantula hawk. This terrifyingly large insect is famous for hunting tarantulas. That's right. Unlike other spider wasps, tarantula hawks are specialists that go after the largest spiders like theraphosids. This is exactly where their name tarantula hawk comes from. They are huge, dark wasps with bright orange wings to advertise their toxicity, and they've been ranked as having one of the most painful stings among insects. Truly, this is one scary bug. But what do you think it eats? No, this isn't a trick question, but it is misleading. Like other bees and wasps, tarantula hawks are nectarivorous. They eat nectar and pollen from flowers, which provides them with the sugar they need to power their movement and fly around. Oh, what's that? You're wondering what happened to the giant spider the wasp hunted? Well, that was food for this guy. Deep in a burrow underground, this larval insect will consume the spider until it has enough energy to pupate. Yes, this is a tarantula hawk, in the same sense that this is a monarch butterfly. But this gruesome life cycle involving giant spiders and killer wasps is distracting us from the big picture here. Complete metamorphosis is granting these insects a very rare power, the ability to completely change what kind of food their body can process. In a sense, holometabolism is letting insects do what dragonflies do, but without the need for living near water. Alright, that's the first advantage. But remember, there are two more. The next one is near and dear to my heart because it's so close to my original hypothesis, and it's a good example of how our human biases sometimes prevent us from seeing clues in plain sight. The pupa is a stage that allows for the greatest physiological differences between adult and pre-adult stages of pretty much any animal. This is because of how much the body can change on a cellular level inside a pupa. My theory was that should have led to more complex adult forms, but hemimetabolous insects seem to match the holometabolous ones on that front. Well, it turns out I might have been looking at things backwards all along. The pupa isn't the most successful adaptation because it gives animals this form. It's the most successful adaptation because it gives them this one. The larva, not the imago stage of holometabolous insects, is the secret here. Let me elaborate. Even though dragonflies and dragonfly nymphs look totally different, their bodies still have to follow certain restrictions to make sure one can turn into the other in just one molt. They have to be close enough, so to speak. You can see in the nymph mostly the same type of legs as the adults, the elongated abdomen that will get stretched out further, and even the parts on the back that will become wings. Complete metamorphosis doesn't have to abide by these restrictions, which means it can solve one of nature's hardest problems. What does the perfect animal body look like? What do animals want to accomplish? They definitely need to reproduce, right? Preferably in large quantities or high rates. But they also need to reach sexual maturity in the first place, preferably quickly, so animals generally want to eat and grow as fast as possible. Now, having a body that perfectly fulfills both these needs is actually kind of hard. This is where the pupa comes in. By being able to morph into a vastly different body, not only do holometabolous insects have incredibly efficient mating strategies for spreading their species, but they don't have to include any of those adaptations until they're adults. Whereas a subadult dragonfly needs to prepare to have the perching legs and wing muscles and jaws and eyes it will have in its final instar, a caterpillar doesn't have to worry about any of its butterfly body parts because its pupal stage is in charge of constructing those. As a result, caterpillars and other larvae have adapted to have bodies perfect for eating and growing, to the point that they're practically unrivaled on that front across the entire animal kingdom. Here's a good example of this phenomenon in action. Back in 1986, a scientist named Elizabeth Bernay conducted what may be the world's greatest eating contest. She set up an experiment to test differences in feeding efficiency, growth, and respiration between a holometabolous and a hemimetabolous insect. The contestants were two herbivores, the armyworm Pseudoletia unipuncta and the grasshopper Melanoplis sanguinipes. Now, I would know about Melanoplis, since in the Denver metro area where I live, they're some of the biggest insects around. Grasshoppers like M. differentialis can grow as large as they do because they're voracious eaters. And if I had run this experiment, I would have definitely selected an orthopteran to represent hemimetabola, just like Bernay did. Don't take that to mean the grasshopper stood a chance, though. The caterpillar unipuncta ran circles around sanguinipes like a pro athlete at an elementary school sports event. The study showed that while the two insects' respiration rates were practically identical, the Holometabolous unipuncta's average consumption rates were more than double that of its grasshopper opponent. The efficiency of food to biomass conversion was also 50% higher in the caterpillar. All of this goes to show what we all should have expected. If you build a body that only needs to do one thing, it will probably be really good at that thing. But let's not forget, that's not where the game of life would end for these creatures. After they've both obtained their final form, Pseudoletia unipuncta, referred to nowadays as Methymna unipuncta, will become this animal. It will live for only a few days, but it will be capable of traveling extreme distances to find mates, thereby likely spreading its genetic diversity farther than Melanoplis sanguinipes could ever hope to. We're basically just adding insult to injury at this point. Anyway, that's where holometabolism really shows its power. Though I can't quite close the subject without mentioning one other convenient advantage. A lot of animals all over the world have to deal with winters. Insects are no exception. They often solve this issue by going into diapause. Much like hibernation, diapause is a type of dormancy meant to outlast harsh conditions. During diapause, an animal freezes its ability to grow and just bunkers down until it reawakens. Many insects can choose to do this in adult form or in egg form, or also as nymphs or larvae, though that's often the least effective stage to pause. Holometabolous insects have an extra option. They can pupate in harsh conditions and emerge as adults right away when conditions get better. Just another option in complete metamorphosis' bag of tricks. Okay, remember that hypothetical from the start of the video? The one where someone asks you why butterflies make chrysalises. I think this is originally a tricky question, because we're always taught that caterpillars turn into chrysalises and then into butterflies, or how they do, but almost never why. Well, hopefully by now we're well equipped to tell people first that an animal like a butterfly, with a larva, pupa, and adult or imago stage, is an animal that goes through complete metamorphosis, or holometabolism. Butterflies and moths aren't the only animals that do this. since beetles, flies, and bees go through complete metamorphosis as well, just to name a few. Complete metamorphosis is a really powerful adaptation, as evidenced by holometabolous insects being some of the most species diverse and widespread animals in the world. The secret of complete metamorphosis is providing three main advantages. If I were to list them in order, from least to most important, the list would look like this. First, animals with a pupa have an extra stage in which they can wait out harsh conditions like winters and emerge when living conditions improve. This is more of a convenience, but it is important to note nonetheless. Second, the pupa allows the surrounding stages of the larva and the adult to look so different from each other that they can process different foods. That means they don't have to compete with each other. Finally, the ultimate power granted by complete metamorphosis is to give an animal two different bodies that are each perfect for filling two necessary roles for survival: growth and reproduction. By ignoring all adaptations that would help an animal find mates and lay eggs in different places, the larval stage can focus on only eating and growing, making it just about the best in the animal kingdom at what it does. Likewise, by giving up most, or in some cases all, adaptations that deal with feeding, the adult stage can focus on searching far and wide for mates, thereby spreading its genetic diversity and laying eggs in faraway places so the species can spread geographically, to higher degrees than any other animal. In a way, the larva and adult stages of an animal are the world's greatest tag team, but the pupa is the only way that an animal like a butterfly or a moth can have both. This is what makes the pupa the animal kingdom's greatest adaptation. I'd like to thank everyone for watching. If you're enjoying this type of arthropod-related content, I encourage you to leave a like and subscribe. I'll hope to catch you all in the next video. You've been watching Arachnorion. Peace.